The next subject I want to talk about this week isn't very easy to talk about. In fact, it's very awkward, and honestly, we have difficulties discussing it throughout the country and the world. Basically put, what happens when you're just foreign enough that there's weird stereotypes about you, and there isn't enough about you to disprove these stereotypes. To give you an idea, see the yellow dot and the green dot? That would be if you had grown up around a culture that isn't quite your own, but similar enough that you can get along with them. For example, when I was a kid, I grew up around Mexicans. Totally cool people. My dad's Argentine. We have similar enough culture that we could talk. My dad could understand them. He never taught me Spanish. But we could have conversations, we could understand each other. There were ways that we could communicate that other people around us couldn't. However, what I want to talk about is this gray chart here. You've been around that culture, but they're not the culture similar to yours, so you kind of put them off. There's actually a lot of patterns that you can find that just help you understand this. I'm going to start off with an easy one. Ralph Baer, or Rudolf Heinrich Baer, was born in Germany. However, he was Jewish. Because of this, he had difficulties in life. So he had to move from Germany when he was 14 to the US because of all of the anti-German rhetoric. However, if you ever read an interview with him, he thought of himself as German, as a normal German, somebody who went out and played board games with other Germans, and then all of a sudden, he was foreign, because he wasn't quite the same as everyone else. Another example is the Roma. They've been around Europe for about 1200 to 2000 years, long enough for them to be naturalized and considered normal. However, if you ask anybody who isn't Roma, they view them, the Roma, as foreigners, as people that shouldn't be accepted, evil. And to be honest, there are differences. I'm not going to deny that. And both feel those differences. They don't like each other because of this constant look at each other going, not from around here. To alleviate this, many immigrants or people who feel that they're outsiders try to make themselves as normal sounding as they possibly can. They try very hard to give up their old culture to be part of this new culture. Sometimes that doesn't work. You're just viewed as too foreign to be normal. So you have to find some other way to not be foreign to others. What some do is they try to fit within the stereotypes given them. As an example, and my favorite version, in the book East of Eden, John Steinbeck's magnum opus, by the way, the character of Lee is said to be Chinese. But the thing is, he can speak perfect English, and he is a very intelligent man. But when he talks to anybody, he speaks as if he doesn't speak English, that he's kind of dumb, and that he kind of has all of these weird mannerisms. As soon as somebody calls him out on it, he immediately goes into his normal form and says, well, yes, I can actually talk to you perfectly fine, and I can do all these things. It's just nobody believes that I can speak English, unless they're intelligent enough to realize it. Every minority culture out there tries to fit within the stereotype given if they think that they can't fit in normally. So they look for the stereotypes that make them look good and fit that. For example, many Germans, German Americans anyway, try to fit the image of the lederhosen-wearing, happy-go-lucky drunkard, because it's much nicer than, the other one. It becomes a way to be safe, but also to connect with a culture that you don't really have a connection with, to become a part of this culture that you have in your life, but you don't understand. For example, I always thought Germans had to be cross and angry at everyone. Turns out no, it was just really polite. It also didn't help that our polite faces look, well, kind of angry. Basically put, if you can, you try to get rid of your former culture and become this new one, perhaps keeping some older cultural stuff with you, but you try to appear as best you can to be part of the new culture. If you can't do that, then you find the stereotype of your culture and you try to fit within that stereotype because that's the only way people will view you. You make sure that this is a cultural connection that people have that is, how shall we say it, kind, sweet, non-beat-upable. If they think that you are not good, they will simply kick your trash. So you want to look harmless as best you can. Also, it helps you connect with your former culture. So often, the sons of immigrants or the grandsons of immigrants will try to connect to their culture through the stereotypes because they don't have anything else. Now that we've seen how this pattern works, I can apply it to a specific culture. And I want to bring up Portland, Oregon. I go there quite often. It's because, A, I spent my childhood there, and B, because there's a really amazing convention there called the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, and I happen to help with the arcade there. So, I go there a lot to check out the arcades, and also to help out at the Retro Gaming Expo. It doesn't help that I have tons of friends. So, this shouldn't be too hard of a story, right? How do the stereotypes fit in? Allow me to explain. At the convention, I started to meet African Americans, and they seemed perfectly fine, except kind of stereotypical. I went to a high school full of black people, so I knew that, yes, there were stereotypes for a reason, and some people fit into them, but not to the over-the-top way that some do. Instead, the people in Portland seem to kind of strap themselves to this stereotype, and it was mind-boggling at times. It was difficult to take. Finally, I had to ask one of them. I said, listen, I don't know how to explain this, but I'm from a black high school. I know for a fact that you are not acting, normally. Why are you acting just so over-the-top black? And the woman who I was talking to responded, well, if you really want to know, it's because nobody believes that I can talk normal. In the same way that Lee wouldn't be able to speak normally, this woman could not fit in with us unless she fit the stereotype. I asked around and found out that everybody there kind of had that same thing going. They had to fit within a specific stereotype and then play with that stereotype to be accepted in Portland. There's a specific reason why. Portland is one of the whitest territories in the entire United States. They are well aware of this. Unfortunately, they also want to be accepting of other cultures, which means they have to deal with only stereotypes because they don't know the other cultures very well. Because of this, the people who are being accepted are, having to use stereotypes because the Portlanders are trying to accept them using only stereotypes they know about. This is fascinating because places where they have a higher density of different diverse peoples, you'll find that, yes, there is some racism there. There's also people getting along a lot more, simply because they know about the other. They have to deal with the other a lot. So you can walk into a restaurant and have multiple cultures around you and be okay with it. This has created a rather fascinating problem. You see, I'm showing New Orleans because they've integrated. They've gotten along. However, you go to somewhere up north, say Portland, say Milwaukee, say Cincinnati, and you have people who will not talk to each other because of the color of their skin. The reason why is the South was forced to be integrated. They learned to get along. Whether they liked it or not, it's another subject, but they're quite integrated, and we'll also admit that there are some racists depending, no matter where you went. You'll find black racists, you'll find Mexican racists, you'll find Jewish racists, you'll find them, but that doesn't mean everyone else doesn't get along. A friend of mine has a good story on this. He works in Columbus and helps out coaching underprivileged youth basketball teams. He's worked within all the racial problems that his city has had, and has had several times where people went, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to go in there. I'm black. I've literally sat with him when one of his players would say that about a restaurant. Then he went down south. He went to a restaurant in Georgia, and realized that nobody cared who anybody else was. And this was the first time he had experienced this in his life. He had grown up in Ohio, a place that we can't even imagine as racist. And yet, that problem exists entirely because they've never had the integration forced upon them. So they've always remained separate. This has created one of the most insane situations you can imagine. Right now, Alabama, the place where people had to march just to be allowed onto a different seat on buses, where literally there were other drinking fountains for black people and white people, where riots happened against black people, where riots happened against white people, where segregation was a common thing, is now more integrated and gets along better with each other than, say, LA or Portland. It's not like the people don't know about the people in the gray area. It's just they're so foreign enough, and there isn't enough information that the only thing they can work off of is stereotypes and ideas from stories they've heard from 30, 40, even 50 and 60 years ago. Because of this, we have a lot of interesting problems where people have to act like a stereotype to survive or be understood, and then other people think that they're being accepting of cultures by demanding that these stereotypes exist. It's not as bad as the Japanese trying to use stereotypes to help explain cultures they have real no connection with. It's more akin to Tyler Perry dressing up as Medea to tell a story, and nobody realizing that her introduction was based on the ancient Greek play Medea, or that Tyler Perry is worth nearly $1 billion and has about $130 million in the bank, because nobody can believe that Tyler Perry used his own culture to make money, and that people somehow recognized themselves within the characters he made. The people involved are not trying to be racist. They're simply unable to make the connection that they think they can, because they've seen things on TV, and they have people right next to them, but they don't really understand the culture given. Because of this, we have a lot of segregation, even in Spokane. Every place in Spokane has kind of the area where specific people live, and if you live outside of that area, well, there's something wrong with you. There's a lot of cultures here, no doubt about it, and yet they're all segregated, and you don't want to mess with that segregation. This gray area is one of the hardest to deal with, because you know the culture, but you don't, and if you were to be honest, you wouldn't understand it as well as you think you do. All that has to happen is for people to go, you know what, I don't actually know a lot about black people. There's not a lot of black people in my area, or not a lot of Mexicans, or not a lot of Chinese or Japanese. Just being honest about it. Then you can find answers. Right next to my university is a place called the Polynesian Cultural Center. It's specifically designed to help people deal with the stereotypes they have of Polynesians, to deal with the fact that they don't know a lot. So they show those stereotypes and let people see the lives and the things that these tourists have wanted to know, and then slowly build off of it so that they understand that, there's electricity in Polynesia, there's internet in Polynesia, there's technology in Polynesia. The people know what they're doing. But they also have these traditions that they want to talk about, and they want to show to others. I think, honestly, this is one of the best goals to have, one of the best ways to introduce others into new cultures. Now, how to integrate that, I don't know, but as an anthropologist, it really is one of my goals.